What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp extension tutorial for you. So in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about how to use solid tools in order to flatten out a space on a site inside of SketchUp. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. So full disclosure, I have talked about this in the past, but I just wanted to kind of review it because I think it's something that can be really valuable when you start dealing with those complicated sites. So let's say, for example, that we have a site that we've modeled out with Sandbox tools. So I'm just going to model out a site like this. Then all we're going to do is just select it. And I'm going to go ahead and reverse all of the faces, and then we're just going to create our topology using the smooth tool. So just real quick, we'll make it kind of a little hill over here, maybe a little bit more of a hill here, a little bit here. And so let's say that you've got this kind of like hilly terrain in here, and you want to create a flat area inside of this terrain. Now the assumption is you're not going to be able to cut the whole hill out, right? So you're going to have some kind of a wall on the back side. And so the way that I like to do this is to use booleans or to use solid tools. And so the way that I like to do that is I like to model out where my site would go. So for example, I'll draw a rectangle, assuming my house was going to go maybe like right here. We'll call it that. I would pull this through just like this. And so what I've got, right, is I've got this space that's kind of indicating where my site is going to go. But there's a problem, because what we want to do is we want to remove out this geometry, right? And so one thing we could do is we could group this, and then we could just right click and we could intersect our faces with our model. But the problem with that is if I hide this, you still have to come in here and like erase everything out and all of that. So it's not really what we're looking for, because we aren't left with a flat space or anything like that. And so what I like to do instead is I like to use solid tools, but I can't use solid tools yet because my site doesn't have any kind of thickness. And so anytime I have a site like this one and I want to give it some thickness, I like to use another extension from Fredo 6 called joint push pull. Well, the cool thing about joint push pull is it's got a function over here called vector push pull. And what that allows you to do is that allows you to push pull multiple faces in a single direction. So the way that works is you can just click on this tool right here. And notice how this pops up all these different menu options up here. We'll talk about those in a second. And I'm going to turn this off for a second just so you can see. So when I start off, I can push pull this down, but my issue is when I push pull this down, this retains the surface on the other side, which is fine, but I want it to be flat. Right, so if I was to click right here, you can see how this doesn't really give me a flat site on the bottom side. So instead, I like to select this option for project the shape on a plane, because what that allows me to do is that allows me to create a flat shape instead. So I'm just going to click. That's going to give me a flat base. Well, the cool thing about this is if I click on this now, you can see how this made this into a solid. And so since it made this into a solid, that means that now we have two solids here, and solid tools can now work with these options. And so solid tools has a function in here called subtract. And so what subtract is going to do is that's going to allow you to remove one object from another object. And so notice how it says it's going to subtract the first solid from the second. So I want to select this shape, click on subtract, and then click on my terrain. Well, notice how when I click on my terrain, what this did is this came in here and this actually removed the material wherever my object was. So now I have a mostly flat plane, right? It's not 100% flat, but it's pretty close. And so now what I have is I have this flat plane in here that I can work with. But one thing that I'm not a giant fan of is I'm not a giant fan of the fact that the ground over here just kind of continues, right? And so there's a couple different things we could do about that. So the first is we could extend our shape. So for example, if my site was going to continue, I could just extend this off to the end, right? That's probably the easiest way if that's how you're actually going to be able to create your site. That actually gives you like this full flat plane. So that's one way to look at this. Another way that we could do this is we could also subtract this and then come in here and kind of fix this manually, right? And so that's probably not the ideal, but you could do that as well. So you could come in here maybe with the smooth tool as well, make your radius like way smaller, maybe like 3 or 5 feet. and kind of bring this all down. But again, that gets kind of messy as well. So another thing we could do, because this should have stayed a solid if I click on it, and it did, is you could just use another Boolean in order to remove the ground over here. So we could draw a shape like this one, and it's picking up the extra around this perimeter, which I don't want. So maybe what I'll do is I'll delete out the extra around this perimeter. This is just leftover geometry at this point, so I can just delete it out. But let's say I was to draw this rectangle in here. Push-pull it across like this. I could make it a group. And then I could subtract that from this point as well. So that's another way that you could do this. And so another issue that you get left with when you do something like this is you've got this kind of like leftover geometry in here, right? Because ideally you would like this to kind of slope down to your line right here. And it's not going to be perfect because you're modeling site work in here, and generally you're more trying to give a visual indicator. But what you can do is you can use another extension called Soap Skin and Bubble, which I will link to in the notes down below, in order to create a skin around this area. So what I would do is I'm going to go ahead and erase this out, right? And I know that I'm creating a gap in my mesh. That's okay, because we're going to fix that in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this out, making sure that I'm leaving kind of a decent perimeter in here, right? But what I've got now is I've got this gap. But what I want to do with my gap is I want to select the edges around the perimeter, like this. And we want to make sure that this is an enclosed shape. Then we're going to activate Soap Skin and Bubble. And so what Soap Skin and Bubble does is it generates a skin based on a perimeter that you select. So I'm going to up the division. I'm going to type in a value of 20. I'm going to hit the enter key. And so notice how what that did is that came in here and that actually like filled in the geometry right here, so things kind of slope down. And you could do various different things over here depending on how you wanted this to go. So so you might have a little bit more cleanup to go in here, like if you wanted your wall to continue or something like that. But we could do the same thing over here, right? And this one's probably a bit simpler because in this case we don't really need, I mean, we could use Soap Skin and Bubble to create like a very general slope, but we're just going to select this perimeter. And if you wanted to, you could even continue this out to about here and kind of fill this in and then draw a line across here. Then you could use Soap Skin and Bubble in order to create a skin right here. So that'll give you that gradual slope if that's what you want to do. So this is a great way to kind of like fill that in after you use the Boolean function in order to cut your site into your hill. And one other thing you could do if you don't like how clunky this all looks is you could select the whole thing. And then we can use the Soften Edges tool to soften our coplanar and also soften our edges. And you might need to come in here and do these individually, but you could do the same thing right here. And then you could even double click in here, select the edges around the perimeter, and you could soften those as well. And then if you still have these perimeters in here, you could just double click, then come in here with the eraser tool and hold the shift key in order to hide the edges around the perimeter. So we can make everything look a lot smoother by doing that. So you can use this in order to create this very smooth looking flat site inside of a 3D shape. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought. Was this helpful to you? Do you like this method? Or is there another way you're using solid tools inside of your workflow? I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.